Hi, I'm Janice. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about an event that I had some time ago now, months ago. It was a one-time event as far as I know. Hopefully it will never happen again. But it was quite an experience, and really a terrifying experience for me. What I had was either called syncope or a seizure. Now, syncope is just a medical term for a fainting spell. And what I had looked very much like a seizure. My arms were moving around, my eyes were rolled back in my head, I actually bit my tongue, and had very, very, very sore muscles afterwards, and I was unconscious for what we determined was between 5 and 7 or 8 minutes. My husband walked in and found me having this event, and so of course he called 911, and they were fantastic, and paramedics came and took me to the hospital for the day. The thing is, for probably, a couple of months afterwards, we were completely convinced that it was a seizure because that's what it looked like, and we didn't know any better. So I've had to do a lot of research in the meantime, because when I went into the ER, they ran some blood tests and monitored my heart rate, which was very high. And that's pretty much it. They didn't run any scans. Sadly, because the doctor saw my chart and saw that I had MS, and of course that means that I had lesions on my brain, he just decided to write it off and say, well, it's probably just caused by the MS, so just talk to your neurologist, go home, I'm done, It's very common, it's really a pitfall that we can all fall into, including patients and doctors, of just blaming MS for every new symptom that you have, whether it is or not. And that's not a good thing to do, because very often we still have health problems that can happen from a variety of different things, and they should be investigated, because sometimes they can actually be treated, whereas MS symptoms, generally you just kind of manage them. You don't really have a cure or a way to reverse them or anything like that. You just kind of live with it and wait for it to hopefully settle down and go away, or maybe not. So it's never a good idea to just blame MS. You should always rule out everything else first, and then you could say, okay, maybe it's the MS. It still might not be, but it's more likely that it could be. So I had months of having to do my own research. The ER doc did say he was going to send my information off to my neurologist. That actually didn't happen. So I had called the MS clinic and also the neurologist's office directly, and neither one of them had any record of this event even happening, and it had been over a month. I had waited because I knew the neurologist was away on vacation. But it turned out it was just another slipping through the cracks kind of situation. Once I did call them, then they started looking into it, they got the information, and I ended up getting referred to another neurologist who was closer to me. So this was a brand new neurologist that I had not seen before, didn't have my history, only reference to the file, the medical file, which you know how well doctors write up medical files. And I don't think that neurologist even really looked too much into it, because I could tell she really didn't know anything about me or my life or my history. She didn't even know I was retired, anything like that. So eventually I saw her, and eventually I finally did have some tests. I went for an MRI and 2 EEGs, and also a couple of different times had a Holter monitor because there was concern about my heart rate. And everything, of course, came back normal. And I'll say normal for me because the EEGs and the Holter came back normal, but the MRI came back showing that I did have lesions, which is what happens when you have MS. That's what it is. So I did have a larger lesion and then 2 little ones, which is actually quite a bit less than I usually have, because I have been doing a lot of things to take care of myself naturally. I don't take any of the disease-modifying drugs at this point. So when we got my MRI results, what happened was, as far as I can tell, this is just my opinion about this new doctor, who, of course, I don't know very well either. And she's young and she's new. What I think happened is that she saw this event, which was terrifying, as an opportunity to convince me to take 3 different drugs. And this was 4 months after the fact. She wanted me on high-dose steroids. I was not having a relapse. The only thing was that she saw that I had 1 larger lesion, and she was worried about it, because now, even though in her first appointment she didn't know for sure if it was seizure or syncope, she wanted to see more results because the EEGs came back fine, and that would be the primary marker that would show that it's something to do with electrical activity in the brain. And I had one including a sleep-deprived one, and that's a miserable one to have to go through. But I went through it and came back with no problem. So now I know they're not very accurate. It's kind of a pain to have to go through such a miserable thing for something that doesn't usually show or doesn't often show. I don't know. All of the possible electrical issues for even epileptics don't always have positive EEGs. In fact, it was interesting, this neurologist, the first time I talked to her, she said that only about 50% of the time do they even show any electrical activity that would indicate epilepsy. And then the next time I talked to her, it had dropped down to 30%. So I'm not really sure if that was just her being unclear or if she was kind of exaggerating. I don't really know because I don't know her. But because I'd had this event, she decided, upon seeing that I had a larger lesion, that must be what it was, and therefore she launched into a very long, detailed sales pitch for the MS medications, 3 of them that she really wanted me to check out. And I'd already investigated them previously, especially 2 of them because my previous neurologist had wanted me on them, and they're the lighter end of the spectrum, Copaxone, Aubagio. And then this new one also wanted me to look into Tecfidera and decide which one I wanted, and she was quite sure I should be on one of them right away. And so I needed to go for blood tests, and I needed to get ready to start all the paperwork because these are very, very expensive medications, and there's a good possibility that I won't even get medical qualification for it so that I would get it paid for. So, and if I can't pay for it, then for sure I can't go on it. So I'd already looked into those. I wasn't too excited about the idea. Tecfidera even has more side effects than the other 2 meds do, so I wasn't too excited about any of them. And it's interesting because if she had really been called immediately and come in to see me that same day or even that same week, I was still scared enough by the whole event that had happened that I might have actually listened to her. I might have said, yeah, okay, I better go on these meds. I better take the steroids. I better, and the third medication that she also wanted me on was an anti-epileptic or anti-seizure medication. And she wants me on that for at least a year, maybe 2. And in the meantime, of course, I am not allowed to drive, which I understand. But then once I go off that medication, then I'm also still not allowed to drive for another 6 months, just in case it happens again, because we're all guessing. We have no idea if this medication might help or not. Of course, it has side effects as well. So maybe some people do fine on them, some people don't do so well on them, and it's a whole mix. And often they don't even help, even if you do actually have epilepsy. So, and of course, I don't really want to take steroids because it's for sure there's going to be real problems with taking steroids, like insomnia and what they call roid rage, where you're just angry and upset all the time because it really messes up your system. So do I really want to go on that and then slowly wean my way off and go for a week or 2 or 3 or whatever it takes without sleep and you know, get a lot fatter and get moon face and all these things that happen? No, I really don't want to do that. And I'm not having a relapse. I was not having a relapse when I had this appointment, and I wasn't having one when this event happened. So I'm going to chalk it up to her being new and young and just not knowing any better, because she really sounded more like a pharmaceutical salesperson than a doctor at that point. At that point, I just said, well, I'm going to look into these things and you can go ahead and do prescriptions and whatnot, but I want to look into them more before I make a decision. And then she mentioned that I'll just have a follow-up with her nurse and we can talk about it a little bit more. The nurse already kind of knows me, so she knew that I wasn't going to be too excited about these meds. That was a challenging conversation as well, because she's very unhappy with me for the choices that I've made about my own health. So that was disappointing, but I won't get into that. The one thing that I really found interesting that I mostly wanted to talk about today was when I was talking with the neurologist the second time when she was pushing the medications. At the very end of the conversation, or very near the end of the conversation, I had mentioned that I think the reason why the event happened as long as it did was because I was in an upright position, and if I had fallen down or been laid down immediately when it started, I probably would have become conscious again right away, and it wouldn't have been such a long, damaging event. And my neurologist agreed with me on that, which tells me she does believe that it actually was syncope, not a seizure, but she's using it to sell the medications. And like I said, if it had been the first week, I probably would have jumped and said, yeah, okay, because I was terrified. I mean, it was a very stressful, difficult time for me alone to try and figure out what happened and wonder whether I'm going to have it happen again. It was stressful to my husband because he saw it happen, which was very traumatic for him to see. And so I had to get an emergency button that I had to carry around all the time, and it was constantly going off with false alarms, and that just, the stress of that being around all the time was very, very hard on me. And there were a number of other things that I had to do during those early months that were very painful, very difficult, and put a huge cloud of doubt and questioning and fear over me, which, does not help your healing and recovery at all. So while I am pretty much recovered from the actual event, obviously my tongue healed, muscles have slowly come around. I did do some damage to my teeth as far as bruising in my teeth, and that actually happened mostly in the coming weeks because I had a lot of grinding because I was so stressed out, and so that created a lot of bruising underneath in the root area on both sides actually, but mostly on the right side, and so that's taken months to settle down. Thankfully I didn't actually damage any teeth, but the recovery has been a slow process. But now we know at this point, as I've studied more about it, I've talked to lots of people, I've read lots of stories, I know now that all of my symptoms can actually be a seizure, or they can actually be syncope. They actually meet all of the criteria for both. And the medical reports suggest that if you bit your tongue, it's more likely to be a seizure. However, many people who have syncope, especially when they have it in an ongoing process, if they have what's called VVS or vasovagal syncope, or if they have POTS, and that's all in the realm of dysautonomia, then they do sometimes bite their tongue. It's going to happen if you have these things happen enough, and you're unconscious and your muscles are doing weird things. I also watched an interesting video of people having syncope. They were actually, it was a controlled trial, and people were putting themselves into a point where they would faint, and it was done on soft mats, and there was someone there to help them fall down to the ground and all that kind of thing, so nobody got hurt. And they did a study, and they watched how different people respond when they've passed out, and sure enough, it sure looks an awful lot like what happened to me. I've since also talked to somebody who has had that because of a heart condition that she has, and her symptoms were exactly the same. So ultimately, now that I know a lot more, I do think it was probably syncope. And that's in agreement with the internist that I had appointments with, and with my family doctor and someone at the hospital. And even the neurologist initially thought it might have been syncope. So I think that's a reasonable assumption. I could be horribly wrong, and if I am, then I'll do another video if that comes out, But here we are, well over 4 months since the actual event happened. I've had no more. I do want to mention as well, something that I had that is often more attributed to a seizure, but can happen with syncope as well, and that is an aura. I did have an aura. I had this feeling of sort of a wave washing over me, which is sort of something that you can't really describe, and when you tell doctors about it, they kind of look at you with a blank stare. They're like, what does that even mean? So it's hard to explain. It's just this, it's the feeling of when you're about to pass out, basically, I guess. And so I had that, and then I also had a very strong feeling of deja vu right before I actually passed out, and it was very comforting. I was like, oh, I've been through this before, it'll be fine, and then I was out. So again, that tends to make doctors think that it could have been a seizure, but syncope, it absolutely can happen with that too. So again, it's not convincing enough to me to think that it was a seizure. Now probably the biggest point that my neurologist had was because I've continued to have some deja vu experiences since then, without any further events, no passing out, nothing, no potential partial seizure, nothing like that, just a little feeling of deja vu, and then it's gone. But the thing is, because I've continued to have those occasionally, usually in the evening, she kind of used that as a means to suggest that I'm probably still having seizures or about to have a seizure or something like that. I'm not really sure, because I would think if you're only having deja vu, that's not enough to say that it's a seizure. And people have deja vu. I have chronic fatigue, and I've had it for most of my life, and so I'm kind of used to having deja vu feelings occasionally. The nature of them is such that you don't think about them really, and they kind of vanish quickly from your mind. But since having this event, of course, every time I have deja vu, I'm kind of freaked out by it, because I'm thinking, uh-oh, is this the beginning of another one? And I have at times actually laid down or, sat myself down somewhere, did something to make sure that if I did fall, I wasn't going to hurt myself. But that never happened. And so I continue to have it occasionally. I've also had super high stress levels since this happened, so I'm sure that's a factor. And sleep has been a problem, even more so than usual. I do have insomnia already, so that adds to the fatigue and makes things more complicated. And then when you're stressed out and your body is reacting weirdly and you've got all these stress hormones running through you 24/7, there's more that's going to happen, more that was not dealt with in the medical system. Nobody cares. They were just, I was left alone and forced to do all my own research to try and figure out what's going on. Nobody took this seriously. Even my neurology appointments, although she sounded very urgent when we were talking, she was also not particularly concerned with how quickly we had those appointments because it wasn't that big a deal. So I know she wasn't all that concerned either. So this is really the catalyst that brought me to making this channel, because I want to talk more about this, because I know I'm not alone. As I've done my research, and especially as I've talked with other people online and read many, many, many stories of people dealing with these things, it is a very common thing to have syncope episodes, or even just one, and be diagnosed as epileptic or having a seizure or seizures for years. And many people have been put on seizure medication only 5-10 years later to find that it was never seizures to begin with, and they shouldn't have been on that medication. There were other ways to treat it. And when it is syncope, some of that seizure medication can actually exacerbate some of your actual symptoms if you have a dysautonomia. So I think it's really important to me to figure out the best I can, make the decision for myself, and advocate for myself. Now, with all the insanity that's happened in the medical system and in the whole world in the last almost 2 years now, I'm discovering that I'm a little bolder than I used to be, and I'm a lot less trusting of the medical system. I'm a lot less trusting of doctors. And it's not that I think badly of them or anything like that. I just think that they are extremely limited in their information. They just don't know any better. They have this little toolbox with a few little select tools that they can offer. They can shine them up, show them to you, offer them, try to encourage you to use them. But in the end, they can't really help you. So I don't have a lot of faith in the medical system. I do think it has its purpose and it can be very useful in certain circumstances. But when you're dealing with chronic illness, it's an entirely different game. You really have to look out for yourself. If you don't have someone to advocate for you, you know your doctor is not going to do it. And probably if you're talking to a nurse, most likely that nurse is really an advocate for the doctor as well, not for you. So, and I'm not bashing nurses either. There are some really fantastic nurses. I have some dear friends who are nurses and they're amazing. I mean, the sacrifices that they make and the work that they do and how hard they work and how much they deeply, deeply care for their patients. So I'm not blasting nurses at all, or doctors. I'm just looking at a really overstressed medical system that doesn't have many options for chronic illness. And really the bigger problem, I think, is that we as a culture in North America, in the Western world, tend to look too much at the medical system. We tend to think it's our right to have all the medical treatment, which is not true. It's actually a privilege, and it always has been in the whole history of the world. It's always been something that you hope for, you pay for, you try to get when you can, and it's limited. There's only so much that they can do for you. Our human bodies are frail, and we're all dying. That's the nature. We're all gonna die at some point. And I think it's important to remember that. Doctors aren't gonna save you. They're not superheroes. They're just human beings who have an education. They have certain tools in their toolbox. That's it. So, and unfortunately, because they've gone through so much training, and I've spent so much money on that training, and now they make so much money, there can be a lot of pride, especially with specialists. It's very rare that you find a specialist who is willing to say, I don't know, or I need to look into this more, or I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. More often, they will say, well, it's just in your head. They'll put it back on the patient. I think that's just human nature. That's what they're going to do. But that's really crappy, in my opinion, because as a patient, you're struggling, you're suffering, and you're dependent on these people to take care of you. So when they're not really taking care of you, what now? You're back to being sick and tired, and you don't have a medical degree, but you still have to figure out how to help yourself. So again, that's kind of why I'm here. I really want to connect people And hopefully we can help each other. Sometimes, I don't know how many times I have looked up a symptom, something I'm struggling with that the doctors aren't going to help me with at all. And I found something I can do to actually help alleviate my symptoms without having to take harmful medication. Sometimes you do have to take medication and it is going to have side effects and all that. I do understand that. But you don't always have to. And I really wish that the medical system was more open to looking at a more holistic approach. And I don't mean that in a fluffy hippie sort of way. I mean just really looking at all the options, not just this limited, you took a course and therefore this is what the course says you have to do and so that's it. There's options that have been helpful for people for hundreds, if not thousands of years that the medical system in the Western world today ignores and downplays and even scoffs at. And sometimes there's legitimate reason for that, but often there isn't. So it's just that it's not within their realm and nobody can make money off of them. So that's a big problem too. I'm sure if you're here watching this, you already know the medical system is largely about just making money, not helping people. So I think that covers what I'd like to talk about today. We still don't know for sure if it was a seizure or syncope, but I do think it was probably syncope, and I'm gonna go with that at this point. If I'm proven wrong in the future, I will let you know. But for now, we're looking good. I just hope and pray that one day somebody will let me drive again. Until then, I don't drive. I don't go for other medical appointments unless I can get a ride somewhere. And I'm kind of stuck at home waiting. But hey, it's been more than 4 months, and sometimes they'll let you drive again after 6 months if they finally notice that, hey, guess what? You're not having any more of these events. So we'll see. And I will check in and let you know exactly how that goes down the road. I am hoping to have another appointment with my neurologist in a couple of months, so we'll re-examine that. That was another thing that I wanted to mention, that when I was given these medications to consider, I really felt in the end that that one larger lesion in my brain was not enough reason to convince me that I should be on all those medications. So I asked if I could have another MRI in a couple of months to show if that lesion was shrinking or not, because the whole point of it was to shrink that lesion. You know, that was the main reason for 2 of the meds at least. And I was told that, oh, well, lesions already do shrink on their own, so we wouldn't normally do another MRI unless you're taking the medication so that we can see how it's working. Do you see a little bit of a contradiction there? The MRI would be just to boost the idea that you got to stay on that med because it's the med that's helping you, not the fact that the lesion itself will actually shrink in time naturally. I mean, who knows now? It might already be quite a bit smaller. But we won't know because I'm not taking any medication, and that's the entire purpose, the real purpose for the MRI. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of content. God bless.